Hi, guys. The goal of today is to introduce you to and explain to you the key concepts of who the Byzantine Empire were and what their main achievements were. And that's going to require some context. So, this week we start our post classical civilizations. These are the civilizations that take the place of our classical civs. So, our classical civs, like the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty, they were big, they were long lasting, and then they all kind of fall for similar reasons, which is that they get attacked by nomads and there is some political and economic corruption. And these new post classical empires crop up in the ruins of the bigger classical empires. Sometimes they're a little bit smaller, sometimes they're a little bit sleeker, but they're still really powerful, and trade becomes even more important. So let's introduce you to the Byzantines. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you this map. So if we remember, in the classical time, this whole area was controlled by the Roman Empire. North Africa, the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and most of Western Europe. And then towards the end of the reign of the Roman Empire, what started to happen were groups of people from up here called Germanic tribes kept coming down and attacking the Roman Empire. And they kept sacking the city of Rome, burning it down, taking all the wealth and money that they could. So what the emperor decided to do, an emperor named Constantine, he decided to move the capital to a new city over here on the Bosporus Strait, which connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. He decided to name that city Constantinople after himself. So when the Roman Empire finally collapsed, when the emperor in Rome finally said, "That's it, there's no more," and the city was taken over by the Germanic tribes, this half of the empire survived. So what ends up happening is the west side, this orange area, ends up falling into what we call a dark age, lights out. All of the great aspects of the Pax Romana disappear. But here on the east side, the Byzantine Empire emerges, and they are prosperous, and they trade, and they interact, and they have achievements. Right, so that's really important. And a lot of that has to do with the geography of the city of Constantinople. So Constantinople was a city on a peninsula, right? It jutted out into this body of water, which would be right here, called the Bosporus Strait. It had water on three sides, so that was easily defended. And then they built massive walls on their land side to protect them from invasion on that side. So because they were well protected and they had lots of areas that ships could sail up to trade, the city became very wealthy. Oops, sorry about that. So this combination of strong walls, a strong fleet of ships to protect the Bosporus Strait, and the general location being located very easily in between Europe and Asia allowed the empire to last for a very long time. The empire actually lasted for 1,000 years. So Constantinople, where it was a crossroads. It was easily accessible by Europe, Eastern Europe. It was easily accessible by North Africa and Asia and the Middle East. Therefore, you had lots of different ideas coming into this city and lots of trade goods coming into this city, which made the city very wealthy and also exposed it to lots of different cultures and ideas. All right, so think about what I just said. And why do you think Constantinople would be called a city of cultural diffusion? Okay. So we're just hitting the highlights of what the Byzantine Empire was about. And religion was actually very important in the Byzantine Empire. And remember, this had once been part of the Roman Empire. So towards the end of the Roman Empire, the Romans had taken on Christianity. If you remember, the Roman roads allowed Christianity to spread all throughout the empire. So Christianity was something that was practiced by most people within the Byzantine Empire. However, what ended up happening was as the Byzantines began to create their own culture, something a little bit separate and different from that of Rome, their views of how the church should be run also changed. So, what we begin to see is this shift in how Christianity was practiced. And ultimately, this shift ends up creating two different branches of Christianity, right? So, we end up with Roman Catholic, which is going to exist in Western Europe, where the city of Rome would be. And we're going to end up with Eastern Orthodox, which is going to be what's practiced in the Byzantine Empire. And one of the biggest reasons for this split has to do with the power in the church. So in the Byzantine Empire, the emperor felt that he should have power over the church. The Roman Catholic Church, or the church that was originated in Rome, said, no, the Pope should have more power. So that major disagreement ultimately caused this different type of Christianity to emerge. So you can see some of the differences, right? In the Eastern Orthodox Church, they tended to speak Greek, which was the local language. You had someone called a patriarch who answered to the emperor. The emperor told him what to do. In the Roman Catholic Church, or what was practiced in Western Europe, they answered to the Pope. The emperor didn't tell the Pope what to do. The Pope had power over the emperors or kings. In the Byzantine Empire, priests could marry, and divorce, although not heavily supported, was okay. And in Western Europe, there was no marriages for priests and no divorce. All right. So it's known as the Great Schism. And here's another representation of what happened. But basically, the East is what we refer to as the Byzantine Empire. They became known as the Orthodox Church. And we see the emperor having far more power over what happened in the church. In the West, in Western Europe, it's known as the Catholic Church. And we know that the Pope ultimately had way more power than the kings or emperors. Okay. So, like I said, this causes a major shift, and we end up with two different branches. They're still both Christian. They still both believe in Jesus and the Bible, and still both want people to convert to Christianity. Okay. Can you think of another disagreement in history that split groups apart and ultimately caused two different versions of something, or maybe a different type of split? Okay. So, as far as important people that you really do need to know about, the most important person that you should probably know about is Emperor Justinian. The empire came to its height under the power of Emperor Justinian. He ruled as what we call an autocrat. An autocrat is a single ruler with complete authority. So Justinian did not have anybody he answered to. And remember, this is the Orthodox Church. So he even told the priests what to do. He told the church what to do. Right? Can you think of another autocrat we may have learned about this year? Another person who had complete control. So, some things that the reason why we focus on Justinian is that Justinian increased the size of the Byzantine Empire. He brought it to its height. He emphasized some really big building projects in order to beautify the city of Constantinople and bring it to its height so that it reminded people of what those old Roman cities had been so impressive about. And he did one of the most important things, one of the most long-lasting things that he did was he created Justinian's Code of Law. And basically what he did was he organized all the laws of the empire. He took a lot of the Roman ideas in law, and then he had his advisors simplify it, write them all down, and put them into a code book. And actually, even today, international law is still based off of Justinian's code and some of the laws that he created. However, we cannot talk about Justinian without talking about his wife. Theodora was incredibly impressive and powerful. Theodora was not just Justinian's wife, she was his co-empress. He named her his equal in rule. She had a seat at the table when it came time to make decisions. She helped promote women's rights, and she was actually the backbone that Justinian needed. When a riot broke out, called the Nika Rebellion, which were people who were actually protesting against Justinian, Justinian was scared and he actually wanted to run away. And Theodora gave him a speech and told him that now was the time to rise up and take control of his empire. And ultimately, he follows his wife's advice to stay and fight. And as a result, this is when he brings the empire to its height. Oops. So, what evidence in the notes we just went over support the claim that Justinian's code was a successful law code? And can you make a list of powerful women you know? And the last, and probably the thing that the Byzantine Empire we focus on the most, is the achievements that they were able to create. And it's really important to understand that the reason that they were able to have these amazing achievements and advancements in arts and STEM has to do with the fact that they were wealthy enough to support that, right? Because they had so much trade funneling in, and they were so well protected because of their geography, they could spend money on achievements. So probably the biggest achievement that we focus on is their use of domes and arches. And I'm going to show you a series of pictures about the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia means holy wisdom, and it was a church that was built under Justinian's rule. And the center dome is so large that the Statue of Liberty can actually fit inside the Hagia Sophia, torch and all. That's how big the inside of this building is. And so what they did was they took the best ideas of the civilizations of past. Domes and arches were something that the Romans were really good at, and they took that architecture and improved upon it. And the Hagia Sophia is a perfect example of that through its series of domes and arches, right? And we tend to see, you can just see a series, all the different domes and arches in this picture of the Hagia Sophia. But that was this impressive building that when people showed up to Constantinople, they were so impressed at the sheer size of this, they knew that this must be a wealthy and powerful city. So the other thing that the Byzantines are known for are the Theodosian walls. These walls took hundreds of years to break through. Invaders kept coming, but no one could get through this series of walls. It was a series of 3 separate walls with a moat in front of it. And so when invaders wanted to come into the city, right, they had to get through the Theodosian walls. And it wasn't until so these were built in the 400s, and these did not come down for 1,000 years. So the Ottomans in 1453 are the first ones to break through these walls, and it takes a piece of technology not yet invented in the history of the Byzantines to break through the walls. Right? And so once again, this church, as you can see, the water's right here. So as visitors sailed up, they understood the power and the wealth of this city. Right? And you can see the interior. Remember I said that the Statue of Liberty can fit under this center dome. Right? And hopefully you can see all the different archways and domes. Okay. Another achievement of the Byzantines is known as the Hippodrome. So the Hippodrome was this massive stadium where they could do chariot racing. It was actually the place of the Nika Rebellion. But this was they took concepts like the Colosseum and built this massive elevated stadium that was used for sporting events. Right? So the Byzantine architecture, they took, like I said, the best ideas of the Greeks, the best ideas of the Romans, the Persians, and other Middle Eastern styles, and they blended them together to make these very impressive things. Right? So here is a massive aqueduct. Right? Do you remember where the aqueducts come from? But this is still standing today. As you can see, modern day cars drive through this aqueduct that was built over 1,000 years ago. Do you remember what civilization invented chariot races? And like I said, blending of all these older ideas. So Greeks and Romans had made mosaics, and the Byzantines improve upon those. And they basically preserve the Greek and Roman texts so that they're there for future use. Right? They keep these documents alive so that history can be learned. Oops. All right, so I'm actually going to stop it.
The Byzantine influence on Russia in your note packet. You're to read through and answer the questions. Pay attention. See, we're going to talk about this group, Kievan Russia, and how they're north of the Byzantines. We're going to see how they influence them in architecture as well.